So if you had a week like mine, you probably fell short. Did you fall short at all this week? And at any point, did you fall short? Did you mess something up? Did you not get it done? Were you not enough? It started out this week, I was golfing at a charity tournament for the Lighthouse Shelter. Mike Wynn put two teams together, and no one else is here that played with me, so you don't know this story, but I'm not a long hitter off the tee. I'm kind of a short of stature guy, and my drives were never enough. And it was kind of emblematic for the week for me that no matter how hard I tried to do stuff, no matter how perfect I tried to be, it was never enough. And if you feel that way, if you've ever felt that way, this sermon might speak to you. So I want to share with you a little bit about the readings today and tell you what I think they have to do with us. So the question that Jesus asks, or rather that Simon asked in his own mind, that Jesus perceived, was, if this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman this is that is touching him, that she is a sinner. And I would ask us, what kind of woman is this? What kind of woman is this? What would Jesus know about her? Well, Jesus knew that she was sinful. And I would say that he probably knows the same thing about us, right? That we too fall short of the mark. We miss the mark if you go to the Greek definition of sin. We miss the mark. We're sinful. We're not perfect. We don't always measure up. We sometimes fail. We sometimes fall short. Oftentimes we feel as though we're not enough. And is there anyone for whom that's true that feels like they don't belong in this sacred space? Is there anyone who feels as though their sins forbid them or prohibit them from coming up to this altar? Is there anyone who stands behind that altar and celebrates the sacrament who is a sinful person? Yes, there is. And this is part of our life as followers of Christ, is that there is sin, and we are sinful because we miss the mark. Really, I think this lesson today is about shame. I think it's really about shame. And there are lots of roots of shame, root causes of shame. One of those is expectations. So think about the expectations that you put upon yourself. I mean, if you're like me, those expectations are pretty heavy. And if you're like me, no one can say anything about you that's worse than what you've already said about yourself, right? I'm my own worst critic. No one can say anything to me that's worse than what I'm already saying to myself. And when you have that level of expectation about yourself, it's awfully hard to measure up. You know, this Father's Day, I look at some of the fathers here in the congregation, people who have raised children, and I say, man, if only I was as good as that guy. If only I had what they had going on. They're doing it right. I'm messing it all up, right? And if you've ever done that with anyone about anything, you're never going to win, right? Because you know your own self. You know what's going on in your own head. You know your secrets. You know your faults. You know your shortcomings. They're on the inside. On the outside, you see the other person's externals. And you see the facade that they put on, right? So somebody put it this way to me once. When I compare my insides to your outsides, I'm always going to lose, right? I'm always going to lose. I'm never going to measure up. Because on the outside, you look great. You look like you got it all figured out. Of course, on the inside, we're all trembling because we realize that we really don't have a clue as to what we're doing. So that's expectations that we have of ourselves. What about expectations that others put on us that maybe we didn't sign up for? You know, when you're employed, there's a job description and that's well and good, but sometimes there are expectations that are maybe unwritten or unsaid. And can you measure up to those? What about expectations in relationships that go unsaid and unspoken? Can you measure up with those? Expectations that are put on you by family members or by friends that want you to be this or that. You didn't sign up for that. You didn't sign on a line somewhere that said, yes, I will be this and that for you. And sometimes when you're unaware of those expectations, you can fall short of something without even knowing it. And then there's a break in the relationship because of it. I think perfectionism is a big part of shame. And Brené Brown writes about this. She wrote that when perfectionism drives you, shame is often riding shotgun, and fear is always in the back seat. That's true for me, because I'm a perfectionist. I want things to be perfect all the time. And if it's perfect 99% of the time, I will dwell incessantly on that 1% of the time that something went wrong. And when I find that I'm doing that, and I'm dwelling on that 1% of the time, shame is right here, an arm's length away, saying, how come you failed? How come you didn't get it right? And that fear whispers from the back seat, saying, you're not enough. You're never going to be enough. Another part of what drives shame is inauthenticity. So that if we're living one life in one segment of our lives, and we're adhering to one set of values in one part of our lives, and then we've got another set of values for another part of our lives. Church people are famous for this. All right? We talk such a good game in here, in this room right here, and then somehow there's a brainwashing thing at the exit that, we just kind of forget what we talked about, and we go out into the world and we're doing all sorts of stuff, whether we're oppressing people, not treating them the right way, not respecting their dignity, whatever it is. We sometimes lose sight of those values. For example, the first reading that we got today from the book of Samuel, the first book of Samuel, this wonderful reading where David is confronted with his own sin, his own experience of falling short. He sinned dramatically. All right, he didn't mess around. He really went for it full on. He saw a woman, he lusted after her. Her name was Bathsheba. She was married to Uriah the Hittite. So David concocted a plan. He wasn't thinking well, but he said, let's send Uriah into battle, and then we'll pull everyone back so Uriah is sure to be killed, so that I can marry this beautiful woman. And he does it, and Uriah is killed. So the prophet Nathan comes to David and tells him this story and says, look, you are the guy that's doing this. David was the king of Israel, the anointed one. And here he was not living out his values. He was essentially leading a separate life. So when we have separate, segmented parts of our lives that are walled off from one another, we're inauthentic. We're not living with authenticity. Robert Frost wrote a poem called Mending Walls, or the Mending Wall. He talks about this and he says, if I build a wall, I should need to know what I am walling in and what I am walling out. And I should like to know to whom I give offense. Offense. In other words, when you do that, you're hurting one part of your life or another. One set of values is going to be betrayed and found to be hypocritical. Now Jesus comes in. Jesus comes into this story, this last story that we read, and there's a woman. And the woman does not have a name. This woman comes in with an antidote to shame. And she's a shameful woman. Let's be clear. Okay? She comes in crying because she is aware of her shame. She is aware of her shame because she is invisible. She is so invisible as to not to be named by the gospel writer. Shame does that to us, doesn't it? It renders us invisible. It makes people see through us because we're not all there. We're like a ghost. So this woman comes in and she begins to bathe Jesus in this loving, respectful, almost mournful way. And Simon, of course, judges her, as we are wont to do. And then Jesus tells a story to Simon about what it's like to live with shame. And he says, do you see this woman? That's a very telling statement. Do you see this woman? Because clearly Simon does not see this woman. His vision is tainted by this cloak of shame that she wears around her. Jesus sees the woman because there is no shame for Jesus. Do you see this woman? And he forgives her, taking away her shame. Now, before we get too far into this, some of you are thinking to yourselves, well, wait a minute, isn't some shame good? Because otherwise we just do whatever we want to do, and there's no consequence. Shame is different from guilt, okay? Guilt sometimes can have good consequences. Shame never has good consequences. Guilt is, I made a mistake. Shame is, I am a mistake. There's a big difference there. Guilt says, I messed up. Shame almost says, God messed up with me, and there's nothing good that I can do. And that is very, very destructive. What Jesus did by forgiving this woman was not only to give her a voice and to give her flesh and blood and bones that are visible to us, but he essentially said to this woman, you are enough. You've brought this antidote to shame into this room, which is your vulnerability. Vulnerability is the antidote to shame. Because when we're vulnerable, what are we doing? We are bringing everything to the table. We bring our joys, our pains, our fears up to this altar. We bring the times that we have hurt people very, very badly, and the times that we have been hurt by people very, very badly. We bring our tears, we bring our sorrows, our shortcomings, our broken dreams. We bring all of those to God, and God says, it is enough. And you are enough. God says to this woman, as clearly as God says to each of us today, no matter what your life has been to this point, you are a unit of my grace. You are loved. You are forgiven. You are cherished. This is what God says to you as surely as it is what God said to that woman. That whatever you bring to God, it is enough. So again, if you're like me, this hits you in a lot of ways, and that perfectionist bone is quivering right now. Because we say, well, wait a minute, when I mess up later on today, this is all going to, fall like a house of cards. No. Because you know what? I am going to mess up later today. I'm probably going to screw up spectacularly later on today. See if you can outdo me. It is still enough with God. Because we are children of God. No more, no less. And nothing can take that away from us. Nothing can take away the forgiveness that God offers us through Jesus Christ, that makes us know that we are loved beyond measure, and that no matter how short we fall of the mark, God always brings us up to where we need to be. This happens when we're vulnerable. This happens when we're authentic. And when we leave that dinner party, when we leave this church, when we leave this altar, we know that we are given God's love to share to the rest of the world through vulnerability, through integrity, and by being the children of God. Amen.